Let's start with Ukraine. Victoria Nuland, who has been a career State Department fixture, and I would say part of the Uniparty, the Uni-war party inside the Beltway that is spoken about more often these days. I guess, sort of an updated characterization of what Dwight D. Eisenhower called the military-industrial complex. Well, she's banging the drums of escalation in Eastern Europe, arguing on This Week with Martha Raddatz that we should be doing more in Ukraine now, and we should green light Ukraine hitting bases inside Russian territory, right in proper Russian territory. Take a listen.
I think they can certainly turn this around, Martha, but the 6-month delay certainly made a difference. The front line for Ukraine needs the artillery that we are sending. They need more air defenses. They need to be able to stop these Russian attacks that are coming from bases inside Russia. So I think there's also a question of whether we, the United States and our allies, ought to give them more help in hitting Russian bases, which heretofore we've not been willing to do.
And do you think they should?
I think if the attacks are coming directly from over the line in Russia, that those bases ought to be fair game, whether they are where missiles are being launched from or where they are where troops are being supplied from. I think it's time for that because Russia has obviously escalated this war, including, as you said at the beginning, attacking Russia's second city, Kharkiv, which is not on the front lines, and trying to decimate it without ever having to put a boot on the ground. So I think it is time to give the Ukrainians more help hitting these bases inside Russia.
New York Times reporting in addition to that, as Russia advances, NATO considers sending trainers into Ukraine. Despite the Biden administration continuing to say there'll be no American troops on the ground. Oh, well, they won't call them troops, they'll call them trainers. You just manipulate the language a little bit to do an end run around whatever your alleged promise was or your red line was. Where are we with that, and the implications of what Victoria Nuland, who, by the way, was the political attaché to animatronic Anthony Blinken in this administration, among many other posts she's held over the years. Has she ever been right? Robert Gates famously said, you can't think of a foreign policy issue on which Biden's been right over the last 50 years. I can't think of one Victoria Nuland's been right about in the last 20. Maybe our friend Stephen Bucci has better memory than I do. Stephen Bucci served America for 3 decades in the Pentagon. As an Army Special Forces officer and then in the Pentagon. He's a visiting fellow in the Heritage Foundation's Allison Center for Foreign Policy Studies. Stephen Bucci, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
It's always my pleasure. Thank you for having me on the show.
So, your reaction to Victoria Nuland's recommendation?
I think she's a little over the top here. Victoria Nuland is not one of my favorite people in the State Department. I'm with you. Her judgment has been manifestly poor in the past, and I think she's either getting out ahead of her boss quite a bit, or maybe the boss is saying, hey, Tory, go out and say this, and this, and see what happens, see what the response is. I'm not sure which of those it is. She tends to say what she believes, even if it's wrong, and so it could just be her operating independently, or this could be the proverbial, flagpole being run up or flag being run up the pole to see who salutes. But I think this is a step way too far. I don't think we want to encourage Ukraine to widen the war. I thought that the goal of all this was to try and get it calmed down and get Russia to back off, not to provoke Russia to do more. So I think, bottom line, in my opinion, she's wrong.
On the Middle Eastern front, I mean, that display at the UN Security Council, the moment of silence for the death of Iranian President Raisi, and our under or Deputy Ambassador to the UN, Robert Wood, standing in silence to mourn the loss of this butcher that's part of a radical Islamist theocracy that is the lead state sponsor of terrorism in the world, as we all understand. You know, these pro forma symbolic acts really, to me, speak to a weakness. And it also speaks to the farce that is this community of nations that is spoken about so often and is one of those meaningless phrases that career diplomats and politicians throw around. I was disgusted at the display. I'm also disgusted at the statement by Matthew Miller from the State Department about the condolences for the. What I mean, why? Why are we sending condolences? Because Iran is our nascent partner in peace in the Middle East. I mean, who the hell do they think they're kidding? I'm talking about the Biden administration.
You're absolutely right. This is another step in the policy program that was begun under Obama, obviously put on the shelf during the Trump administration and then taken back out immediately when Biden came to office, of trying to somehow convince themselves that Iran is a useful partner in the Middle East. And, you know, I'm not sure. I know there are a couple of people in the Biden administration who are ardent supporters of Iran and vehement enemies of any of the various Sunni powers in the Middle East, who are, frankly, none of whom are perfect, but are, you know, at least have from time to time been useful partners for us, as opposed to an outright adversary. But that's the only justification for doing what they did. You know, playing along with these worthless symbols. Look, everybody knows that this guy was the butcher of Tehran. He is hated definitely by the expatriate Iranian community, but by massive numbers of people inside Iran who lost daughters, who lost sons, who were beaten by the police, all at the behest of Raisi. He's a bad guy, and the world is a better place that he's gone, and the foreign minister wasn't any better.
Was this crash an accident, or was he targeted?
You know, it looks on its face. We still need to dig in a little harder, and hopefully our folks are. But it looks like it's more than likely it was an accident. Very, very old helicopter given to the Iranians during the Shah period. You know, they fix stuff as they can, where they can, you know, get parts in there. We haven't sold them any parts, but that helicopter is probably as old as you two, and it's, you know, that's pretty long in the tooth for an aircraft flying around mountains in bad fog. So I think the combination of the bad helicopter, don't know the quality of the pilot's training, but the weather, I wouldn't want to fly with some of our best pilots in weather like that. It was crazy, and I'll be willing to bet it came down to the pilot told the president, "Hey, Mr. President, we can't fly. We'll have to take you down the mountain, you know, by vehicle." And he said, "I'm the president of the country. You fly this aircraft, and, you know, we'll be protected by Allah." And you know what? He wasn't, and the aircraft crashed. And they'll probably blame the pilot, and he was probably the first one who tried to wave him off.
Somebody joked online that the helicopter was taken down by a Mossad agent named Ellie Copter, and that
What?
and that actually got picked up. This is sort of like something Wong, and it actually got picked up and was being pushed through like Hamas channels on Telegram and so on and so forth. They're actually trying to push that as propaganda. That is, you know, it's Israel's fault. Ellie Copter, special agent.
I saw that as well. It just, this
That's
is like
awesome.
when they announced Kim Jong Un had been chosen as the sexiest man in the world, and the North
And they put a
Korean
release
press
out.
all picked up on it and believed it. It's like, oh my God, get him a
Yeah.
subscription to the Babylon Bee.
Right, and it also speaks to like I can't believe we're losing to these guys. But anyway, the other matter to tackle, and we talked about this a couple weeks ago, and and there were op-eds in the Wall Street Journal. Where is the Biden administration? Where is the West sending the message to the International Criminal Court? Don't even think about it. And all the Biden administration could muster was to send Jake from State Department out to say we don't see any evidence of genocide and continue their middling rhetoric and calls for ceasefire. And now the ICC, former employer of one Jack Smith, by the way, federal prosecutor in the Trump cases in D.C., but now they're seeking arrest warrants they're seeking to arrest Bibi Netanyahu and other senior Israeli military officials for war crimes. Because America can't step up and tell them don't even think about it. The UN is morally bankrupt. The ICC is morally bankrupt. What are we doing with these quote unquote international, organizations and forums where the community of nations could come together and stroke each other?
Well, this is the height of hypocrisy when some people allude to a moral equivalence between what the Hamas terrorists did on October 7th and what Israel has done as a responsible nation protecting its people. But these guys now, they have drawn a legal basis for that. They have handed that to Hamas, saying, oh, no, these guys are totally equal in this conflict, and they all should be treated exactly the same way. That is giving Hamas such an endorsement and such a victory. It's crazy. And you're right. The U.S. should have squashed this. The U.S. should have vilified it before it ever was announced and completely stripped it of any sort of legitimacy. Instead, we wring our hands and clutch our pearls and swoon and say, oh, this is terrible. But they don't do anything about it. So it's kind of, again, it's typical Biden administration, particularly with the State Department, weak sauce, which just makes our adversaries laugh at us.
And I don't know which is more morbidly comical, the helicopter piece or George Clooney's wife being somehow instrumental through the Clooney Foundation for Justice. I mean, that's satirical. I wish that was satirical, but it's not. That she was instrumental in getting charges brought by the ICC against Israel as well as some Hamas leaders.
Yeah, I saw a report this morning, and she, to her credit, said, look, I was just part of the committee that advised the court on the status under international law. But so she's not claiming that she was the key to the whole thing. She was just part of it. But, leave it to our press, because now they've got a celebrity hook to it. So that's going to get all the focus and will give it legitimacy in the eyes of a lot of people who watch the old legacy media outlets.
Right. Yeah. I mean, of course. I mean, who would question the legal judgment of Amal Clooney? I mean, good grief. So the actual prosecution of the war itself against Hamas and this dithering by the Biden administration with respect to military aid to Israel and Bibi moving forward. I assume this is just going to be treated as white noise by the Israelis, and they're going to continue to march forward. But where does that stand as you understand it?
Well, Israel has said, we appreciate your interest in our security, but your opinions are not that relevant to us. They said that to the Biden administration. They've said it to the rest of the world. They have made their decision about going forward. There is one domestic, hang up there where the one minister said, look, you need to come up with a plan for what we're going to do with this chunk of land and all these people once we get rid of Hamas. They had a plan where they were going to turn it over to an international, coalition of forces, preferably Muslim forces, to try and run it. But none of those countries have said that they would do that. So Israel is in kind of a fix here that once they get rid of Hamas, somebody needs to administer Gaza. Israel doesn't want to do it, contrary to all the idiots who say this is a colonizing action. That's just total nonsense. But they do have to get somebody to volunteer all of these virtue signaling organizations and countries to say, okay, we'll come in and help. But none of them have been willing to do that so far.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's interesting, the commentary. None of them have been willing to provide sanctuary to any of the Palestinian refugees, and none of them want to get involved in the governance of Gaza. What does that tell you about the population? I'm just saying.
It's that none of those people want to deal with them, and they darn sure don't want them inside their own borders.
Stephen Bucci served America for 3 decades as Army Special Forces officer and top Pentagon official, visiting fellow at the Heritage Foundation's Allison Center for Foreign Policy Studies now. Stephen Bucci, thank you as always. Appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me on the show, and we'll talk to you next week.
Yep, thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Connect with Dan and Amy using the AM 560 mobile app. Download it today at 560theanswer.com/mobile.
This is Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com for Town Hall. If it seems perverse that the ICC would target the victim nation of an invasion by a terror network that perpetrated the worst organized atrocities in decades, then you're just paying attention. But it gets worse than that, as prosecutor Karim Khan's demand actually validates Hamas's human shield strategies. To claim that Israel is responsible for civilian deaths in Gaza rather than the terror network committing the actual war crime of staging military and terror operations in civilian areas is a grotesque moral inversion. This validates terrorism and Hamas's human shield strategies, making it impossible to ever fight and defeat terror networks that attack established states. The ICC waited over 7 months after October 7 to take any action against Hamas leadership, despite the obvious evidence of atrocities. Now they want to make a moral equivalence between genocidal terrorism and legitimate armed defense. It's patently outrageous and does nothing but incentivize terror attacks on civilized nations.
Okay, this season, don't get tripped up by uneven concrete around your home. Whether it's a sunken or cracked sidewalk, porch, stoop, driveway, or patio, these problems will only get worse, but there is an easy solution. Call Permaseal today, 800-421-7325, and ask for a free inspection. Their poly-level service can raise and level sunken concrete quickly and effectively, putting an end to eyesores and dangerous trip hazards. Poly-level is the quickest, least expensive, and most durable system to repair your sunken concrete problems. Don't live with a potentially dangerous situation. Call Permaseal today for a free inspection. They have financing programs that allow you to have the work done now and pay for it in 18 months without interest. Permaseal has been a trusted name for over 40 years and has an A+ rating with the BBB. Don't be scared